Now, obviously, both of these statements are apparently incompatible with each other, inconsistent with each other. Monopoly allegedly is bad, but in this area of production of law and order, everybody seems to think there we need a monopoly. Now, the fact that there is an inconsistency here has rarely caused any concern among philosophers and economists. Hardly anybody is even aware of this contradiction. And insofar as people have recognized that there is some sort of contradiction, that you cannot on the one hand say monopoly is bad and then on the other hand say, but the state must of course be a monopoly of law and order, insofar as people have just recognized this, then they have typically taken the position that it is the first statement that might have flaws, that monopolies are not always bad, but the second one is certainly correct, that you need a monopoly state that produces law and order. Yet there are in fact fundamental theoretical reasons and mountains of empirical evidence that it is the second statement that is in error, that we need a monopoly provider of law and order. Now, as a territorial monopoly of ultimate decision-making and law enforcement, the state is not just like any other monopoly, such as a milk or a car monopoly that produces milk and cars of comparatively lower quality and higher price. In contrast to all other monopolies, the state not only produces inferior goods, but it produces bads, it produces non-goods. In fact, it must first produce bads or non-goods, namely taking something from people against their will, or causing conflicts and then deciding the conflict in its own favor in order to do any benefits that it bestows on other people. To explain that in more detail, if an agency is the ultimate judge in every case of conflict, then it is also judge in all conflicts involving itself. And consequently, instead of merely preventing and resolving conflicts, a monopolist of ultimate decision-making will also cause and provoke conflict in order to settle it to its own advantage. You hit somebody on the head, and then you say, I did that because you deserved it, you looked at me in a strange way, and you call your judges to your help, and they will just say, absolutely right, that's the way it was. That is, if one can only appeal to the state for justice, justice will be perverted in the favor of the state. Constitutions and Supreme Courts and such things notwithstanding. These constitutions and courts are also state constitutions and state courts, and whatever limitations on state action they may set or find is invariably decided by agents of the very same institution that is under consideration. Predictably, the definition of property and protection of property will be continuously altered, and the range of jurisdiction will be expanded to the state's advantage. That is, the idea of some given, eternal, immutable law that must be discovered will simply disappear and will be replaced by the idea of law as legislation, as something that is made up by the state, as arbitrary state-made law. To give you an example, when communism fell apart and people wanted to get their property back that had been expropriated from them during the communist regime, then they turn to the Supreme Courts in the so-called free Western countries, which allegedly protect private property. Do you think in any of these countries the Supreme Courts then decided, of course, all the property has to be given back to the previous owners? In none of the states that was decided this. In all of the states, the Supreme Court said, yes, of course we protect private property, but you won't get your private property back. And if what you get is compensation, but the compensation has nothing to do with the market value. Would you ever imagine that a Supreme Court would come to the conclusion that, oh, since we are funded by taxation, we ourselves are an illegitimate institution? No Supreme Court will ever come up with an idea like this. Would you ever imagine that a Supreme Court comes to the conclusion we should limit the range of jurisdiction, the range of decision-making that Supreme Courts have? The answer, I have never seen a Supreme Court ever doing something like this, and I'm betting my life on the fact that it will never happen in the future. No. Moreover, as ultimate judge, the state is also a monopolist of taxation. That is, it can unilaterally, without the consent of everyone affected, determine the price that its subject must pay for the state's provision of its perverted law, whatever it might be. However, a tax-funded life and property protection agency is a contradiction in term. The state is supposed to be protecting our life and property, but how is it protecting our life and property? By first attacking our life and our property. That is, a tax-funded life and property protection agency is a contradiction in term. That is, an expropriating property protector. Now motivated, as everyone else is, by self-interest and by the fact that nobody likes to work, but equipped as it is with the unique power to tax, state agents will invariably strive to maximize expenditure on protection, and you can use almost the entire gross national product and pretend that you use it for protective purposes. But at the same time, do as little as possible. The perfect position is you maximize expenditures and you minimize actual work. Who wouldn't like to be in that position? So these are the general errors of statism, so to speak. Now I come to the specific errors of democratic states.